Hi, everyone. Welcome to this month's episodes of Female Frequency Podcast. I just cannot not talk about what's happening in the world today, especially from this art perspectives, because what's happening inside our museums is the most important cultural issue I think we can be talking about. And so today's episode is all about what is possible because let's remember that museums are not neutral spaces. I've studied museums and academically, as well as personally and passionately. These are sites of creativity and community and meaning making. They shape how our societies understand themselves and what is remembered, what is erased, and what is passed forward. So I'm very excited about today because we're living in unprecedented pressure right now. Because I can't even say unprecedented times because as I was getting ready for today's interview, I was like, look what happened in China in the 60s to 77. Look what happened in McCarthyism during those years. Look what happened in Brazil in just 2019 and beyond. And what it's it's just something that I just keep asking the question, like, what can we do now? What's possible? So I just want to just read this a little bit too. Is across the United States, museums long framed as objective sites of learning. So they are now facing political mandates that directly challenge the inclusive research based and the creativity and the truthful representations of history. And we know that that's being changed, and our guest today is helping change that. But let's talk about what happened in 2025. President Trump signed Executive Order 14253, restoring truth and sanity to American history, redirecting federally affiliated museums to remove what the administration described as improper ideology or divisive race-centered narratives from exhibitions and programs. I get so angered by it, I start shaking. And so this directive explicitly targeted institutions such as the Smithsonian and the National Museum of American History and Culture. I mean, like, whew.
Mm.
At the
Yeah.
same time, yeah, nearly one third of US museums have lost government grants or contracts, cutting forces to educational and cultural programming that serve students, serve these rural communities, serve the elders, serve people with disabilities, and historically marginalized audiences. So this isn't a bipartisanship thing. I mean, this is about whether museums remain places of truth telling or just become whitewashing instruments of historical flattening and cultural amnesia. It drives me crazy. So this is why this conversation really matters to me and my friends and to my guest, Deana Dartt. Thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Jodie. It's good to be here. It's good to see you.
Oh, it's so good to
Yeah.
connect with you.
So it's such a weird time, right? It's unprecedented for us, for you and I. Um, in my lifetime, I've seen lots of really bad museum narratives and very kind of museums that need work. But there were growing numbers of us that were seeing that, and there were these big changes that were afoot, and so it's almost like we finally, those of us who have been marginalized and haven't been part of the dominant narrative, haven't seen ourselves reflected in museum spaces, we're starting to gain traction. Um, and museums over the last 20 years have really moved in the direction of including our stories. So we were just starting to feel empowered and and our communities were starting to see themselves reflected. And now we're shut down again. And the the good news, if we can find a silver lining, is that we have a lot more allies now because people like you, lots of, uh, folks, non-native folks, white presenting folks, are our allies in this now because you've seen how rich and meaningful, and a chunk of your lifetime has been inspired by those representations that maybe our parents never saw, right?
Yes.
Um, so so it's great that the awareness exists, and there are enough of us that are pushing back that and looking for alternatives. We've just kind of carried on, and I have a particular amount of privilege being college educated and being pretty white presenting, and I come from a really disadvantaged background, but I've assembled um, a lot of privilege, and so I've been able to walk pretty freely in the world. And a lot of the people I have encountered were ready to hear what I had to say. And the disappointing thing is that even now at this point, even though I might have a large following of people who want to hear what I have to say, we're hemmed in by funding, or we're hemmed in by the danger, frankly, the growing danger of being really outspoken. Um, so, um, yeah, I mean, I can't get up and operate on a daily basis without finding hope in some, activity or some organizing. And I've been thinking a lot about like, what's my contribution if I'm not going and standing in front of the courthouse with the picket sign? Um, my daughter went to a candlelight vigil the other night for Alex Preddy with
Hmm.
a group of nurses at the Eugene courthouse, and it was supposed to be a peaceful vigil. She brought some sage to burn, and but when she arrived, there were a bunch of protesters banging on the windows, and the ICE agents threw down tear gas and flashbang, incendiary uh, devices, and there were old people that were knocked down, and it was very, very frightening for my girl who just wanted to go and protest in a peaceful way. And so marching in the streets isn't for everyone, right?
Right.
And
Right.
but I'm glad that people are doing it. um, but my work has always been um, about challenging the master narrative. And so I'm not going to start doing that. I'm not going to stop doing that.
Hmm.
Um, Sadly, museums might not be uh, safe places to do that work anymore, but we'll find places to do it. And
Yeah.
yeah, I know
When
you have other
you
questions, so I'll
so when you founded, I'd love just to share some of your accolades. So you're founder of Live Oak Consulting and one of the world's most respected leaders in decolonizing museums and cultural institutions. I've taken your workshops. They have scared me in a way that I didn't, that educated me even more. And it was a beautiful cross section of everyone in the class wanting to be better humans and walk lighter with our fellow communities. It's a, they're great workshops. And I'm looking forward to hearing how you're taking those workshops and expanding into your future too. Um, so your work definitely goes beyond representation because you're addressing structural foundations and going from the inside out, going the academic route out and educating those academics, something that I admire so much. Um, and helping museums and corporations and other institutions interpret history and be the better stewards about these collections and remain accountable to the communities whose stories they hold. Um, I could keep going on and on about you. Nothing is more essential and to our humanity than the stories we choose to preserve and share our culture. And decolonizing the museums is at its core about doing all of this. Just, it's very complex, and I just think you do it so well. Um, so yeah, one of the questions is, what are you seeing out there, like with our museum community about shaping the direction of museum practice right now? Like we're
Mhm.
losing our truth.
Yeah. Well, um, yeah, I mean, shortly after Trump was inaugurated, I mean, at the end of his last term, um, he had made a threat and had empowered whistleblowers around DEI work that was happening in governmental agencies. I think there was an executive order at that point too. And so we've had a few years, during the Biden administration to think about what would that mean if we were not able legally to do the work we do.
Yeah.
If I can't do these decolonization trainings and I can't curate exhibitions about hidden erased narratives of marginalized people, like who am I in the world then? that's a that's the that is what I do. So I've been thinking a lot about, what needs to happen to anchor the thinking that is inherent in the training that you did and the work that I'm doing with many different kinds of agencies, museums, land stewardship organizations, municipalities, big corporations. And one of the things and one of the tools that I hope we can still mobilize
Yeah.
is the standards for museums with Native American collections. Had I done that yet when we spoke last? I'm not sure.
Yes. I think so.
So yeah, so that was American Alliance of Museum sponsored, School for Advanced Research sponsored, and also the National Museum of the American Indian sponsored set of guidelines for museums that have Native American collections to be accountable to Native communities in a variety of ways. And it's essentially um, a step-by-step what museums can do to strengthen the work that they do, the documentation of their collections, their exhibitions about Native life and cultures, um, and bring museums into the 21st century in terms of who Native people are and how to engage with Native people meaningfully and in a way that is mutually beneficial. And I have developed a whole series of modules that will be available online. Oh,
Okay.
I wanted to say that um, right at the beginning of this, right after Trump was inaugurated last year, it's actually been, yeah, last year. It feels like it's been 10 years.
Hasn't it? I hear you, sister. I hear
But
you.
we lost a contract with the National Museum. It wasn't, it was the National Museum of Natural History, who houses the NAGPRA department, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act department is in the National Museum of Natural History. And their role, the NAGPRA department's role, is making sure that the Smithsonian held Native American remains are returned to those communities of origin and so that they can be reburied and cared for in the tribal way. There are hundreds of thousands of skeletons, Native American human remains that are in the care of the Smithsonian Institution and its various museums. And so the NAGPRA team has a lot of work that they've been charged to do, and you can imagine that their morale, keeping their morale up, in the face of, funding cuts and, a whole variety of organizations, institutions, and the government itself not being supportive of the work they're doing. And they're doing heavy, hard spiritual work with tribes, communities. So we were going to go in and do a series of allyship trainings with them, and just try to help them develop resources internally to navigate the hard work. And that was literally the first contract that we lost in 2025, right after Trump took office. It literally disappeared off of their calendar. Um, and the
Oh,
person who had brought us in called and said, "I'm so sorry, Deana, but," and it had taken us 9 months to get the contract through the federal system. And, we were ready to go, had the training on the calendar, and it was taken off the calendar like poof.
just, yeah,
And she called
delete.
and said, "I'm sorry, but yeah, we can't do this anymore." So imagine the folks that are working within those federal institutions, what they're up against, right? But then all of the institutions that receive federal funds, grants. The institution, Museum and Library Services, is the number one funder of exhibitions and programs, and the National Endowment for the Humanities, the key funder for museum exhibitions, National Endowment for the Arts. All of those federal grants are what make what we see in our culture and artistic life in this
Yes.
country,
Yeah, the
right?
power of art now has been
It,
it's ceased. And so
mhm.
like you were saying, mobilize, like how do I help mobilize? Like what do I do? Or what should the admin
Yeah.
people listening here would do?
Well, allies, allies can help. I was just telling you before we got on the air that I'm fundraising right now to create a tool to get these materials out to museums
Okay.
and also to anyone, you not only organizations, but individuals who want to retool. We're in the process of finalizing the videos for the core curriculum of what we once called Decolonization 101 and Decolonization 102, or now I'm now calling Healing Colonial Legacies. And it's a body of material that, yes, is about trying to undo the colonial harm, but it's moving in a direction that's much more proactive toward healing modalities, such as developing a sense of belonging, and developing empathy, and dealing with our grief, right? Extinction grief, climate grief,
Climate grief,
um, you know,
extinction grief.
genocide grief. This is what we're seeing in the world, and expected to see and then soldier on is um, is not sustainable.
It's
We
not
might be able to
sustainable.
stay upright for a little while, but um, so many people are having a difficult time getting up and doing what's right in front of them. Also, if you're noticing, everything has become more complicated. Levels of authentication to get into your, I don't know, your IRS portal or whatever. Everything takes so much more time and energy. And I am exasperated half the time with just trying to pay my electric bill. And I have money to do that. Imagine, being dependent on social programs that are also going away. And so we have to find ways to connect as a community and look this stuff, you know, um, in the eye. And it what I'm thinking about is less about fighting and more about building. because uh, we're gonna we're gonna use a lot of our energy marching in the streets every day, and we're still going to be left without those connections and safety nets in our own communities. So we need to buckle down and start spending time finding ways to connect with our neighbors and how to support each other, which is something this dominant culture has made very difficult for
Hmm.
us to do. And so here we are in a moment in time where we don't have those safety nets, and we're completely indoctrinated into this dominant culture that doesn't care about us, right? It doesn't have spaces within it for nurturing one another um and healing.
And
uh
healing, and that's what I always found in museums is that it was healing for me because there's different ways of learning that each one of us can absorb
Absolutely.
better where and wherever we are at our intersection of our lives and our nervous systems can help come in. I mean, I think I even learned that I was a person that freezes like a deer in headlights looking at some of the artwork and did with some of it I would just get overwhelmed, you know. And
Yeah.
then when I started studying museology, learned even more about that, almost like I was going down a path of a teacher or something, just because I was working in education departments and really seeing how much work goes into being able to capture the imaginations and the
Mm,
attention of all the different types of learning.
mhm, mhm. And Jody, I mean, we can keep we can keep doing that work, right?
Yeah.
Because there are many of us who know the power of museums to bring people together. And so we must. My experience is that um, teaching about Native life and cultures and resilience and solutions, Native values based knowledge um, is is best taught in the informal learning environment, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, maybe it happens I mean, I took several anthropology classes, as I'm sure you did too. And I learned a lot in the university classroom, but I'm a visual learner, and I really learn best when I'm inspired. And so art works so well for that. You had asked me about reclaiming El Camino
Yeah, yeah,
at the
that was an
Autry
exhibition
Museum.
that I learned from you. I can't wait to talk about this because I do have like three or four questions about reclaiming the El Camino. The first one is, do you think that that exhibition could have been done now
I
with where we
do.
are in our
Uh,
political climate?
I do. Um, because frankly, though that executive order is only applies where federal funding is utilized. And so is it possible to continue doing this work with private funds?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it could be. Um, what's tough is that so many of the big institutions receive federal funding, and I don't know yet what that the implication of that
Yeah.
is in those institutions. But a direction we're going to have to go is creating spaces that are funded by foundations and continuing to do the work. Will we be? I mean, they're continued, regardless of what's happening in Washington, D.C. Some of our neighbors don't want us to do that either, right? And
Yeah.
so it's walking a difficult line, but I still would have um, executed that exhibition in a private space. I don't know that the Autry wouldn't support it now.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
I'll
it just
treat.
really depends on the institution, um, but it definitely pushed up against a lot of resistance, even at a very liberal institution, because we refused to remove the word genocide from the narrative. And, there were all the, this pushback saying, this is the definition for genocide and it doesn't actually fit, And I had assembled a team of advisors that the Autry was committed to allowing to, guide the exhibition. And the chief curator got on the call with it was all women. It happened to be all women. And there were all these aunties, these elder aunties saying, hell no, will we take that word out? That is what occurred in California. And, here are some of the stories. And so I created a big graphic that was the 10 stages of genocide that I borrowed from a Holocaust museum, and then showed examples of each of those 10 stages in California, and how it's still, there are still aspects of that genocide from a discursive level that are still alive and well, right? Not writing in non-federally recognized tribes into the story, or anthropologists and academics saying, we're not really Native Americans because we have Mexican ancestry. We were colonized by Mexican Indians, and so we're not really American Indians. And just this continued attempted erasure that we're still up against, And so these stories, those are my story, my stories from my mom's family and community, but there are myriad stories of genocide, marginalization, oppression, injustice that need to be told still.
Yeah.
And we have to find ways to tell them. And our allies, potentially the people who listen to your podcast, those that have, trust funds or inherited wealth, that's a great direction to go, right? Let's look for alternatives together. Let's build things that aren't going to be disrupted or influenced by some fascist
Right. Right.
ideal of making white American it's a fantasy white American narrative the dominant. We've moved beyond that.
We
Are we
have.
going to go back to that?
Right.
Like,
Right. Um, in your exhibition, Reclaiming the El Camino, it got into some complex issues culturally as well as academically, because you were borrowing from the Holocaust, so you had to create relationships with there and antiquities. Because what one of the two things that I was learning is how you took one quote unquote artifact that is more than just an artifact of a hat, like this
Mhm.
representation of being able to follow the story, the spirituality, the experience of this hat that is being taken care of or housed in Canada, right? But it really traveled a long way to get there.
Yeah. No, it's actually housed at the British Museum. It
Okay.
was collected by Vancouver. And it's a women's work hat.
Okay.
And I didn't know that. All of us in the community who are working on different aspects of revitalization of our culture, certainly the weavers, all knew about the Padre hat at the British Museum. Very few, um, at this point now, 2026, maybe 10 people among us have been over there and seen it. Um, went and saw it over there, but yes, we had the opportunity. I had it on my object list to pursue a loan for the exhibition, and because it's so significant. And I had an opportunity to go to London for a convening of Pacific scholars and Indigenous people from throughout the Pacific. And we convened at the British Museum. And so I got to see that beautiful hat, Sumalelu.
Mm.
And when I saw her in person, I walked over, right? I got to select them online, and they pulled them so that when we arrived at the museum and collection storage, we could see them in person. And I walked straight over to her, of course, and looked down at her and realized that she's actually a women's work hat. So it's a padre hat with the big wide brim and little crosses on the brim. So it's definitely a padre hat, and that's what it said in the catalog, and that's what we've always called it, right? But as soon as I saw that hat, I knew that it was a women's work hat, and then I just started to cry that at the thought that at a time when women weren't allowed to weave unless they were directed to weave something for the purpose of um, the either the priests or the soldiers, or the people in power, um, and our the women would wear those hats to work, they to do all of their daily activities, keep their hair out of their face, to keep, especially in the wind right on the coast, how windy it is, having a
Yes.
hat is necessary. Well, these women weren't allowed to weave, but she was asked to weave a hat for the padre, or ordered to
Yeah.
weave a hat for the padre. So I wanted to get the hat, and what I wanted to do was to exhibit it in context with other women's work hats. So she would be among her sisters again. And so when she arrived in the crate, a few weeks before the opening of the exhibition, we were there just seeing her out of the crate. She had arrived back in her homeland after 190 years, and no, more than that, 240 years. Um, we sang her out. And then on the day that we put her out on view with those other women's work hats, um, there was a group of Chumash people from the various tribes, communities of Chumash, singing her onto that platform to be reunited with her sisters. And the weavers all spoke words about to welcome her home. And then she got to be an ambassador for the year and a half that the exhibition was on view, to talk about um, the way that our culture was taken away to distant lands, and the way that our women were forced to do things while in captivity, essentially, in slavery, uh, and the way that culture was undermined during that mission period. And so she enabled us to tell stories that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to tell, because objects do that. They open a little portal. They create an inspiration, a curiosity, and a willingness to hear a story you might not hear from just a text panel that's not accompanied with a beautiful object. Anyway, and so she got to be an ambassador, and a teacher, and be surrounded with her sisters. And then at the point that the show closed, there was a group of Chumash people there again, saying goodbye and weeping. And
Yeah.
but the cool thing too is that the British Museum hosted a group of Chumash weavers,
Okay.
um, and the catalog at the British Museum now speaks of her as a women's work hat, speaks of her as a sumalelu, and tells a more robust story, a more honest and truthful story about the missions. It just in the catalog.
Yeah.
And alone. So yeah, that piece that was huge to, and imagine so many objects can be used to tell those hard stories.
Yep.
There was also a korma in the show that we had to have replicated because there isn't any remaining. But a couple of indigenous scholars from California found reference to something called a korma, which is basically a hobble. It's a piece of wood with holes for that closes on your ankles, and women would be, if they were promiscuous, so essentially if it was found out that they were raped, or if they had a liaison with a another person, they would be forced to wear the korma for a prescribed amount of time and have to work and have to get to meals and have to function with their ankles basically bound by a big chunk of wood and a chain. And
Right.
we told that
It's,
story.
I mean, thank you for telling that story because, yeah, rape culture just keeps getting pushed down or covered up with the most
Mhm.
asinine folklore to follow it. I mean, it's crazy falsehoods. So I like how you just slid that in there. If she was promiscuous, meaning she was raped, I mean,
Right,
come on, that's
right.
two totally different
There
things.
were there were also dorms that get spoken about in the mission museums as being this place where young girls would stay, and they would make crafts and they would sing, and they're called monjeros, and the monjeros were actually where girls and young women over the age of 8 were sent because they were afraid that they would have extramarital sex, and so therefore they were locked in a space with no windows from the time the sun went down until the next morning, and there was no ventilation in those spaces, and they were very crowded, and so the mortality rate for girls in the Monjero was 10 to 1 what it was for other people in the mission. So you knew that if you had a baby girl that she was very likely going to die once she turned 8. Not only was she going to be prey to the men, but also that she would likely die from the conditions in the Monjero.
Yeah.
So we talked about that without any shirking of of the truth, that and the Autry supported it. The only place we got pushback was in using the word genocide, but we were able to
We will.
overcome that. But everything else, it's all historic, it's all documented. It
Yeah.
wasn't as if I was making up any story.
A different perspective, right? Just the truth of the perspective of truth. And your work isn't over yet with that exhibition because you and I both have a love of UNESCO heritage sites. And how are you doing creating the, well, tell us more about your work with UNESCO and this exhibition. Like,
Yeah, so the goal, the exhibition was part of a larger project of it's stemmed out of my dissertation work. My dissertation was called Negotiating the Master Narrative, California, California Indian and Mestizo Communities and Museums, or something like that. It's been a long time, but um, rather than putting the responsibility of changing the narratives to on the museums and missions, which I have no control over, the goal of what we now call the Indigenous Coast Narrative Project was about disrupting narratives and supplanting those dominant narratives with our own stories, and doing so utilizing uh, a website, first of all, with a story map. So I'm in the process of creating these small videos that will have GPS coordinates and be available online, so you can hear first person stories from Indigenous people from throughout California, and also one of the pieces was, so it was a website, it was a set of educational materials, and then working with the International Coalition for Sites of Conscience to basically reclaim the El Camino. So not just from San Diego to San Francisco, which is what's considered the El Camino Real, the California missions, but we have relatives all the way down to the tip of Baja Sur, right? And so it was about reclaiming that road that literally goes all the way from Baja to San Francisco, and reconnecting with our what is now Mexican relatives, right? Just
Yeah.
indigenous Pacific Coast indigenous people, just like the people in California, that are now sequestered by a border that doesn't allow us to move up and down our coast, but to reclaim that. It was initiated making the Camino a binational cultural or a binational heritage corridor
Oh,
by the California Missions Foundation. But the narrative they were going to tell, um, that's a white anthropologist and historian organization, the California Missions Foundation. And so their narrative was just to celebrate Spanish conquest. And a group of Native leaders, this was 8 years ago, convened in Monterey and talked about how it's a great idea, make it a binational corridor, but the narrative needs to be ours. Or there at least needs to be a parallel narrative that is ours. Not one more time colonizing our place with a new narrative that's an old story. And but right after the initiative, Trump pulled us out of UNESCO, where the United States is not part of UNESCO any longer. Um, and so having it be a UNESCO site of heritage isn't something that we're continuing to pursue. Getting International Site of Conscience status is something that I still have on my to-do list. I mean, they are conversations I've had, but I haven't gotten a great deal of traction. My hope is that by doing these educational pieces first,
hmm
build awareness, then
hmm
we have a body of people who believe this is the right thing to do, and then we're able to make it happen. It can't just be, that's another place that your listenership can support, is that we can't do this work just us. Imagine trying to live in Santa Barbara right now. It's so ridiculously expensive that most of my relatives are working more than one job, living with, multiple relatives in order to stay in Santa Barbara. So we just don't have a lot of time
Yeah.
for doing the narrative change work. We've got people that are restoring cultural fire to try to mitigate wildfire
Yep.
damage and the loss of life. And then we've got people working on ocean conservation because our kelp forests are dying. So those are the, like the on the ground, feet on the ground. If I have any time in my day, that's the work I need to be doing, rather than that more narrative policy um, stuff that someone like me that actually has a job doing
Yes.
those kinds of things
Yeah.
um, has to carry. But I really need allyship. I really need, folks who are helping me carry that message out into the world, like yourself, and helping me find funding to be able to focus on these things. That's it all comes down to that. In a market economy, you have to be able to feed yourself while you're changing the world.
While you're changing the world, I'll make sure all of your information is in the show notes below, above, all the things.
Sweet.
Yeah,
Awesome.
absolutely. Is there anything you want to help close us out with on today's episode?
Yeah, I would just say that keep your eye out
Okay.
for these online modules.
Okay.
We hope to launch the core curriculum by June and the museum curriculum by December. I'm fundraising, but I'm also working on the modules. And right now, I have several land stewardship organizations, including the Oregon Department of Forestry, helping to fund the development. And next week, I'm piloting the materials to the Grand Ronde tribe, the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, to see if they might want to partner with us as well. So we've got good support. So either A, help, support that work, but definitely B, keep your eye out for the launch of the materials, like I said, the core curriculum about healing colonial legacies in June, and then healing museum legacies in December. And I'll be building out, I'm going to create a podcast too, and start doing webinars. And the focus of my work is going to be really creating that online community rather than doing live trainings anymore. So I'm
Okay.
excited about that, and
Let's
it's
just,
been fun talking with you about all
it,
those things.
it has. Let's go to the radio waves, Deana. Let's go.
All right, I'm
All
there with
right.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jody.